I know immediately what you're all thinking. It's not the case. His 3 DC EU movies were incredibly flawed. Killing Superman off in his second movie is a wild choice. However, I like all 3 films and I think they work best when you watch them as a trilogy. Man of Steel works as an introduction to Cavill's incarnation. For me, the movie does mismanage the upbringing of Clark, especially. The messaging he receives from his father is really muddled, but it establishes him well enough going into the next movie, with Man of Steel acting as his first introduction to the world from his perspective, and the world's reaction to aliens, essentially. Batman v Superman is what that's all about. I truthfully really like this film. I think it's probably my favourite of the 3. Heresy! And the whole point of the film is the reaction to Man of Steel and the implications of such a character. What I find interesting about his characterization here is the fact that this new movie seems to look at a similar thing, at least to some degree. The implications of another worldly being interfering with the world's wars, and this film attempts to look at that, and that plot and idea becomes really convoluted due to Lex's insane plan and method to frame Superman. It's a bit of a mess. But the key thing is that it looks at the effect it has on Clark and the world's response and how that impacts him.
To have an individual engaging in these state-level interventions should give us all pause.
And we see kind of the world's reaction, particularly through Bruce Wayne. Bruce is pushed further and further down a hole out of fear with these implications of this alien having such power on his home. Ultimately, at the end of the film, Clark of course decides to give his life for the planet that isn't even his own, despite what the world thinks of him and despite his own made mistakes. So then we come to a world without the Superman, and still with Bruce's fears coming true of otherworldly beings raining down hell to planet Earth. I think Snyder's Justice League has a pretty brilliant representation of Superman and the idea of Superman. As much as the journey there was a muddled mess, I love merging the ideas of not knowing what you have until it's lost and bringing that to a character like Superman. I think it is a genuinely great idea, and I think the film does a pretty good job at building that up. Throughout the film, Bruce is desperately trying to bring together a team to protect the planet, knowing of this impending doom, but successes aren't coming too frequently, and with the rise of the threat every second, they resort to one big thing: faith. I truly love this. I think Bruce's arc across these 2 movies is pretty well done for the most part. The prior film, he is a man driven totally by fear, unable to see the person behind the power, along with the rest of the world. And of course, that also affects Clark and how he feels about himself and the world.
Must there be a Superman?
There is.
But in this movie, when they decide to bring Clark back, he isn't right immediately. He is a walking weapon who doesn't know who or what he is, but knows where he left off. One of the people standing in front of him right now tried to kill him, and knew that the rest of the world feared him.
People hate what they don't understand.
It's only Lois that is able to re-find his humanity, and here's another one of the biggest misfires of these movies, in that I think there's a real lack of chemistry between Clark and Lois, unfortunately. I don't really buy their relationship. Lois gets less and less to do as the movies go on. If it had continued to grow at the pace that Man of Steel set up, I think a moment like this would have been much more effective, as well as the end of BVS, but unfortunately that's not the case. That's not the direction they went. So, after being brought back and being hit with just waves of confusion, the Justice League are once again left alone, without any clue as to whether they brought Superman back, or something worse, or even if they did bring him back right. Will he even help? As they head into battle in the final act, Bruce seems uncharacteristically sure that they've done the right thing, with even Alfred questioning it. Bruce doesn't have any tactical answer. Bruce's logic has been lost. He responds with faith.
Faith, Alfred. Faith.
The Justice League go into battle, knowing full well they have no real hand in this fight, but still knowing that they have to try, and to try, they need hope. And with hope, the return of Henry Cavill's Superman works so much more than it theoretically should. After not really feeling much when he died, to feeling so much hype upon his return is a testament to the execution and direction and performance in this film. We finally see a Superman that is in tune with both of his lives. He doesn't have to be an ordinary human or a god. He can be whoever he needs to be. Something about the fact that Clark immediately goes home is really impactful to me. And that's where he regains his sense of self. So much more effective than the strange hike that he went on in the last movie. All he wanted to do was go home. It's where he's able to reconnect with his soul, with the love of his life and his mother. And sure enough, this coming together of all his being is represented incredibly through the flight sequence. Mirroring directly the absolute spectacle that was the flight sequence in Man of Steel, Clark returns to the Fortress of Solitude in the flannel and jeans as he views all the Kryptonian tech and suits, remembering the words of all of his fathers. This is the moment where he decides who he wants to be, where he finds his truth. Stepping out of the bright white light in the full black suit, not only here for Earth, but for Krypton, for those lost along the way and for those looking for hope today. As the important words echo through his mind, he accepts who he is, beyond good and evil, beyond Krypton and beyond Earth. Superman, Clark Kent, accepts every side of his being as he takes flight once more, reborn, accepted in himself.
Your heart was tested.
They will join you in the sun, Cal.
Fly, son. It's time.
You will help them accomplish wonder.
Junkie XL and Hans Zimmer did an outstanding job on the soundtrack, particularly with this sequence, and Snyder never fails with his visual style. Following this, Bruce's faith and hope is repaid with Superman's return to the fight, which is finally what gives them the upper hand after the others were able to keep Steppenwolf at bay, and the action is great. It's brutal, but never loses the sense of hope and optimism that this Superman has now found. It doesn't matter how many demons on how many worlds, Steppenwolf has never fought these guys united. There's no doubt that the characterization of Superman throughout the three movies was mixed. I think in a strangely similar way to Tom Holland's Spider-Man trilogy actually, it can serve as an elongated origin story, even though it's very clear that the first movie was meant to be that. Of course, there's no doubt about that. Obviously in both cases, it was retroactively changed. I wonder if this would have been the case if Snyder's Cut had the theatrical release, or if this was a case of hindsight after the reception of the first two films and the final movie. And I'm also not sure if any of this would have followed on to the initial planned sequels. And if I'm honest, I doubt it due to the obsession with the Dark World Superman. And whilst that trope has been beaten to death now, I found it effective at the time. I think it works for these films, with the darker tone Snyder implemented, especially when Batman comes into the universe. It shows us in a literal sense what could happen, and within this trilogy of movies, after the death of Superman and the resurrection, you feel the risk of that coming to life. I feel like it wanted to pose the question of what if Bruce's faith didn't work? The finale of the film showcases the hope that Superman does bring, but the first half and the epilogue show the despair without a figure like him, and when fear drives you. Whilst we never saw the true story of Ben Affleck's Batman, we can very much gather a sense of the point of life that he's in. Bruce is someone who has seen the darkest corners of this world, seeing manipulation manifest and turn good men cruel. If a god is living amongst men like one, what prevents that same manipulation from turning them on a world-ending catastrophic level? I found this all pretty interesting at the time, but it has aged pretty poorly considering the amount of evil Supermen we've had, you know, in Invincible and The Boys, Brightburn, you know, it never ends.
I am better!
But the last scene of the movie, before the epilogue that is,
Besides, who's gonna give you a reach around?
we see Clark leaving work, embraced with his identities. Both of his lives have come together to make him him. And that's when we finally get the iconic imagery, wearing the suit underneath the coat before fading to black. I know this video is going to receive various responses, and I don't blame you. I know a lot of people don't connect with this iteration of the character, which is totally valid, and I know some people will like the parts that I don't like. And that's all fair. I mean, I think why I find these films so interesting is honestly because everyone has such a different thought on them. It's a shame that we never got to fully experience a developed Superman in his own film, in a Man of Steel 2 or any kind of follow-up, but I do think these three movies do provide an interesting arc of an alienated individual, desperately wanting to find himself in the most extreme of circumstances. As much as it would have been more effective to dive deeper into Clark's psyche and understand him much more, I do think that's still there and still effective enough for me to generally care. These films almost look at the darker side of humanity in a way, and thrust this beacon of hope and light. This character that represents all these incredible things is only viewed through the darkest lens that humanity can find. And how does that affect him on a individual character level? It creates that doubt, and I adore he actually takes a second to step back, go home, and reflect, and that's how he finds himself. And I think that is really effective. So ultimately, I think these three movies serve as a pretty great Superman story, and I'll always be grateful for Cavill's performance.